I'd always assumed that Viking boat burials were a myth, and I'd always assumed they were a myth because I was told that they were a myth. I was told that films like The Northman from 1958, showing a longship sailing off into the sunset, peppered with fire arrows, and then burning its way down to the bottom of a fjord, were complete nonsense. And they are, because that's not how they worked. But Viking boat burials are a thing, and Viking boat burning is a thing. So before we dig into a little bit about the Miklebust ship and various other ship burials which are super cool, you guys already know that I'm really discerning with my sponsorships, and you might have noticed, if you're eagle-eyed, that there is a paid promotion banner on this video, and that is because I am very pleased to announce that this video is brought to you by History Hit. Yes, that History Hit. The history hit that brings you the stories that shaped the world through its award-winning podcast network and online history channel. It's like Netflix, but it's all history. You can watch hundreds of hours of original history documentaries anywhere, anytime, on any device, brought to you by expert historians such as Dan Snow, Professor Susanna Lipscomb, Dan Jones, and more. And as well as already having hundreds of expert-led programs, they add 2 more every week, and History Hit also launched 19 new episodes weekly across 8 podcasts, including the world's leading history podcast, Dan Snow's History Hit, which I have been listening to for years, in fact since before I moved to Scotland at this stage. So you guys are going to follow the link in the description. You're going to get 50% off your first 3 months by using the code Welsh Viking at the checkout, and then you're going to go and watch programs like Ray Mears' The Bow, because who doesn't love Ray Mears shooting longbows in the forest? History Hit! Now, I know that you will be interested to know that there is a specific museum dedicated to one of the coolest and, as far as I'm aware, the biggest Viking ship burial that we have on record, and that is the Miklebust ship. And the Miklebust ship was found in 1874. So it was found at a place called Miklebustad by a man called, check's name, Anders Loranger. And Anders Loranger was a fairly well-known archaeologist in Norway already, and he had been working for the museum in Bergen to check out some mounds near this farm. And there were 5 mounds there, and in one of the mounds they found an incredible assemblage of artifacts, including 1.5 kilos of human bones that had been cremated, and, very cool, an enamelled bronze Irish-style vessel. This is in the old petty kingdom of Firda on the west coast of Norway. So, definitely a place associated with Viking raids, definitely a place associated with people going to places like Orkney and Shetland, but also, apparently, somewhere with a very, very high status person. A man in his 30s, we think, who was buried in a ship. And then the battery in my camera died. The story of the Miklebust ship is really fascinating because it's a real archaeological mystery. Sometimes you get headlines and clickbait articles that say that something is baffling archaeologists, and if you remember last year I did a video about the supposed tomb of Harald Bluetooth. Well, this time we've got an actual burial mound for a possible king. Now, this part of Norway in the early to mid-9th century was part of the kingdom of Fjordane, and we are told in some of the later sagas that it gets absorbed into the unified Norway in 872 by Harald Fairhair. Supposedly, according to the sagas, one of his biggest battles was a naval battle against a local king called Audbjorn. Audbjorn is one of the kings of Fjordane, this place in western Norway, and as usual, I'm sorry for all of my pronunciations probably being way wide of the mark, but I'm doing my best with limited knowledge and intelligence. There's a lot to suggest that this is a royal burial. For a start, the sheer size of this thing. Just to give you an idea, the mound is 30 metres wide and at least 4 or 5 metres high, which is pretty impressive for a grave. The contents of the grave we'll look at in a bit more detail in a second, but the main thing, the big, cool, sexy thing about this thing is the ship. So you've probably heard of a couple of Viking ship finds, like the Gokstad ship that was excavated in the 1880s, and the Oseberg ship that was excavated in 1904. You've probably also heard of the much, much earlier Sutton Hoo ship. You may even have heard of the burial in Sutherland in Scotland, the Balnakeil burial, which is where I'm taking inspiration for my next sword scabbard from, incidentally, and was excavated partly by colleagues of mine. But chances are you haven't heard of the Miklebust ship, and there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all is it's a fairly early discovery. It was discovered in the 1870s by a local museum's archaeologist, so from what I can tell, Anders Lorango was based at the museum in Bergen, from what I can tell, Bergen, in Bergen's museum, rather than being like a big internationally renowned academic archaeologist. And one of the big reasons the Gokstad and Oseberg ships are more famous than the Miklebust ship is they're intact. Well, they're as intact as you can be after 1,000 years plus under the ground, but they are ships. They are wood and metal, and you can see them, and there is hull and riveting and a beautifully carved figurehead possibly, and they are, for all intents and purposes, intact wooden vessels. The Miklebust ship, however, was burnt. So if you go and have a look at the Gokstad ship or the Oseberg ship, you'll see all of these incredibly preserved finds. We've got textiles, we've got tapestries, we've got tablet weaving, we've got the tablet weaving loom, still all wefted up and warped up, and we've got things like the weapons, and we've got the furnishings and the furniture. And at the Miklebust ship, we don't have a lot of that because it's been cremated. This was a full cremation burial. So rather than what we have at Oseberg, where it seems like remains were put into the ship and then the ship was simply covered over with earth, which is similar to what we have in other burials, places like the Isle of Man, we see something like this. In Miklebust, what we have is a human man is cremated, seemingly put into a bronze vessel, which we'll talk about, and then the ship that he is put in has also been cremated with him. So, as one of the sagas that's much later, one of the sagas describes the ideal disposal of a human being as being a full cremation and all of their possessions being sent with them. That seems to be what we've got here, is this guy dies, is cremated, all of his junk is cremated with him, it's all piled into this burial mound that's then covered over with earth, and the ship is so long, it's 100 feet long, that the ends of it looks like, had to then be folded in, like a souffle mix, into the middle of the cremation pile, because it was too long for the mound that they had prepared for it. And this mound is one of 5 mounds in this location. There are 5 burial mounds around Miklebust, and this one is fantastic. So we know that the ship was very long because we have over 7,000 rivets from it. We also have 44 shield bosses. That's the metal bit from the centre of the shield, which we presume were lining the gunnels of the ship. So you get this famous depiction of Viking longboats with the gunnels covered in shields. That's a thing. They were stored there. And we've got 44 shield bosses, which suggests that this is a pretty big ship. It's actually bigger than either the Gokstad or the Oseberg ship. If it's 100 feet long as we think it is the biggest one of the 3. Dude buried in the ship, from what we can tell, we do have some bones. There is still some osteoarchaeology we can do on this guy. He had lots of cuts on his bones, lots of incisions, which suggests he died a violent death. From what we can tell from the remains, from the bones, he was in his 30s. So he was about my age. He was a well-built dude of about my age, fairly well-nourished, and he died a violent death. That suggests to the people who are making the museum on the site, certainly, that he may have been King Audbjorn, who died in battle. This may be the burial mound of one of the last petty kings of the west coast of Norway, the king of Fjordane, Audbjorn, this legendary man, who died in battle against Harald Fairhair. This might be his burial mound, and that's a really cool idea. We obviously don't have "This is the grave of Audbjorn" written on a standing stone on top, which would be really handy, but we can't necessarily say it's not his grave. It's certainly the grave of a very big, very wealthy man, and surrounding this man are obviously these shield bosses. We have some jewellery, we have weaponry, we have swords, spears, and the thing in this mound that genuinely startled me was the bronze vessel. that this king is buried with. Now, if you're familiar with the Osseberg ship and the Gokstad ship, you might be familiar with this chap. He was found in the Osseberg ship, and he's often described as a Buddha, and he's not a Buddha. Being a Buddha suggests that he has come from East Asia and that he has travelled all the way from over there. It's often used as justification for the theory that there is a direct trade route from Europe to China in this period. There is a trade route from China to Europe in this period, but it's not like it is now, where you phone up and ask a Chinese manufacturing company to make you 1,000 mobile phones. They stick it in a truck, which goes to the airport, and it comes directly here. It wasn't like that. They weren't sending a messenger over to China and saying, please can you make us 20 Buddhas in bronze, and they put them on the back of a yak train or a camel, and it comes all the way across the landmass of Eurasia, drops it off at Mr. Sigurdsson's house, and he signs the invoice. That's not how that works. It was a huge, complex series of smaller networks that all came together to form the Silk Route and the trading routes from China and India, bringing things like iron and steel and various other products. And silk, obviously. No, this is an enamelled bronze figure from Ireland. So this is an Irish figure, and the fact that we've got one from here in Miklebust as well as Osseberg is super exciting. Not least because there is some difference in the chronology between these two grave sites, but also because this guy was probably made in the same workshop as this guy. So the same Irish craftsmen, their enamelled bronzework appeals to the tastes of Scandinavian rulers in two different places at two different times, and one of them is used as a cremation vessel, possibly for a king. How awesome is this? How cool is this artifact? And I didn't even know this. I didn't know that this thing was paralleled. I didn't know that there were two of this artifact in existence, and it is super, super exciting. How cool is that this all but forgotten giant ship-burning burial contains this incredible tiny little bronze artifact that tells us about the trading links, the tastes, the art styles of the period. It's amazing. Like I say, you probably never heard of this ship. I didn't know it existed before I started the research for this video, and that is frankly shameful, because it's a spectacular. Efforts have been made to publicise the ship. In 2019, a full-scale replica, so a 100-foot-long replica, was built and sailed up and down the fjord by a company that has now built a museum dedicated to the burial mounds there. Like I say, there were 5 burial mounds, and some of the other ones contain all sorts of stuff, weapons, spears, burials of other kinds. It's really, really fascinating sight, and it does deserve more publicity, so have a little read up on it. If anyone reads Norwegian and fancies doing a full academic translation of all of the stuff in Norwegian that I couldn't read about this incredible site, then that would be lovely. But it's brilliant. Go and check it out. The Miklebust ship. Have I written it on screen yet? This is what it looks like. That's how you spell it. It's fabulous. Go and check it out. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this little sort of primer about this forgotten Viking ship burial, and I hope you enjoyed realising that Vikings actually did burn people in ships, or at least they burnt people and burnt ships. Whether they did it at the same time is questionable. I'm not actually sure if the guy was burnt in the ship, or was burnt and then put into the ship, if that's a standard thing, or if this is a weird thing, and normally they would just chuck him in and then burn the whole lot, including the dude. But it was probably a combination of both, from what I've been able to glean from various excavations. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Diolch yn fawr iawn am ymuno. Thank you ever so much for joining. Till the next time, tan y tro nesa, hwyl fawr. Bye bye.